trusting God when you don't want to. It's human nature to want to follow the path of least resistance. When given the choice, we often prefer to act selfishly because it's what comes easiest. On the contrary, Christian living is difficult. God often asks us to set aside our selfish desires and choose what has eternal value over what has earthly value. When we don't want to do what God asks us to do, what we're really saying is we don't trust Him. Maybe we think God doesn't know what He's doing, or we don't believe He has our best interest at heart. Either way, we're not alone. Plenty of people in the Bible had difficulty trusting God right away. There's nothing wrong with feeling uncertain. It's what we do after that emotional reaction that matters. In the Old Testament, God told a man named Jonah to go to Nineveh and warn the people that if they didn't turn from their wicked ways, God would destroy them. However, the Bible tells us Jonah went in the opposite direction. Instead of surrendering his desires and choosing God's will, Jonah trusted his own plans. But it didn't go well for him. He ended up being thrown overboard and stuck in the belly of a whale for 3 days, before eventually going to Nineveh anyway. While Jonah's story is pretty extreme, we often do the same thing. We run from God. We choose not to trust and obey Him. We refuse to surrender what we want for what is God-honoring. But it's not always with a rebellious spirit. Sometimes we're afraid to surrender because we know it will require a significant sacrifice. Let's look at the story of Esther. She had favor with the king of Persia and was in the perfect position to save the Israelites when one of the king's men wanted them dead. But she was afraid. It was against the law to approach the king without being summoned, and he could have her put to death. In the end, her uncle helped her see that it was her purpose, and God used her to save His people again. What God asks us to do often isn't easy. It takes sacrifice on our part. It takes a willingness to humble ourselves and acknowledge we don't know everything. It takes trust. But that trust isn't blind. We know who God is and we've seen all He has done, so we can trust His promises for our future. Then, it is our trust that enables us to be obedient. The best biblical example of obedience is Jesus. Being fully God and fully man, the human side of Him didn't want to go to the cross. He knew there would be unmeasurable pain and loss. He asked God to spare Him if there was any other way. But ultimately, Jesus chose to be obedient and surrendered His human desires saying, "Not my will but yours." If you're having difficulty trusting God, ask yourself why. Are you afraid of the unknown? Hesitant to make a sacrifice? Or are you perhaps unwilling to give up sinful behavior? Even when we recognize it's harmful to us, sinning can be hard to stop because at least we know what to expect if we continue. Stopping requires a different kind of faith, but we can rest assured that God has better for us on the other side. Like we saw in Jonah's story, disobedience often leads to more heartache, hurt, and struggle, and when necessary, God may even block our rebellious path to draw us back to Him. There's protection and blessings when we walk with God. That doesn't mean there won't be sacrifice. When we choose to follow Christ, we lay down our old lives so that we can become more like Jesus. We acknowledge that our lives are no longer our own, but His. When we choose His will, we may lose our friends, reputation, and comfort. But living a life of sacrifice for Jesus is more plentiful than a life without Him. Choosing to trust God, surrender to His will, and be obedient to Him actually gives us freedom. It allows us to walk in His righteousness, without guilt and shame. It helps us walk in boldness, believing that He is good, His plans for us are good, and our future is secure. A life of surrender is an abundant life. So, what's holding you back from surrendering and trusting God? Set it aside. Honor God with your decisions, no matter the cost. Choose to start walking in freedom today.
But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa. And he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house, more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer: Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. Saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Righteousness shall go before him, and shall set us in the way of his steps. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up thy way with thorns, and make a wall, that she shall not find her paths. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death. For, brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another.